I have 6 o'clock, so I would like to call the school board meeting for Tuesday, September 1st, Tuesday, September 15th, 2020 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Ms. Jenkins, please call the roll.
Mr. Barron?
Here.
Ms. Bradley?
Here.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Cody?
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle?
Here.
Ms. Martirano?
Here.
Ms. Sawyer?
Here. I want to welcome all members of our community to our board meeting. We thank all guests, board members, and participants in advance for keeping their microphones muted until it is the appropriate time to speak. If you are interested in speaking to an agenda item, please let us know in the chat or contact Erin Jenkins at erin.jenkins@dmschools.org. Before moving ahead, though, this evening, I would like to acknowledge that this past week, the Des Moines schools community lost one of their own. Connie Simmons was a beloved bus driver for many years for the district. So before we start the meeting, I just would like for us to take a moment of silence in her honor. Thank you. The first item of business is approval of our agenda for this evening. May I have a motion and a second to approve our agenda?
Caldwell-Johnson moves approval. Bradley second.
We have a motion by Caldwell-Johnson, a second by Bradley. Please call the vote.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Cody?
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle?
Yes.
Ms. Martirano?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes. The vote is approved 7-0. The next item on our agenda is the approval of our minutes from our last board meeting for, Tuesday, September 1st, 2020. May I have a motion and a second to approve minutes?
I move approval.
Second, Cody.
We have a motion and a second by Mr. Cody. Without any discussion or questions from the board, please call the roll call, Ms. Jenkins.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
Pass.
Mr. Cody?
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle?
Yes.
Ms. Martirano?
Yes.
And Ms. Sawyer?
Yes. The next item on our agenda is the consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please make sure that you make it known in the chat or email Erin Jenkins. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to the agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Mr. Barron, I believe, do you have the consent motion for this evening?
I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $8,342,694.71, and procurement card transactions in the amount of $342,335.09.
Is there a second?
Caldwell-Johnson second.
We have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson. Any discussion or questions? I actually think we might have speakers related to this item. Is that true, Ms. Jenkins, before we have discussions or questions? Okay, please call our first speaker.
Ms. Sharon Castle?
Hi. Yeah, Shannon Castle.
Go ahead, Ms.
Hi,
Castle.
Ms. Castle.
I have 3 daughters, 1 in 5th grade and 2 in kindergarten. I open enrolled my 5-year-old into Carlisle and was denied by the Des Moines School District. I'm appealing this decision because at this time, Des Moines Public Schools cannot meet my children's learning needs. Like many 5-year-olds, they're energetic and full and have a short attention span. I feel that my kids need in-person learning and the social environment that the Des Moines schools cannot provide at this time. So far, the virtual learning has been a huge stress to myself and to my children. My 5-year-olds are constantly getting up and cannot concentrate on a computer. One of them cannot even sit still through a Disney movie, so this is no surprise that she can't sit still through the virtual learning. They cannot learn this way, and I cannot be looking over the shoulder of 3 kids at the same time. You add into that 2 working parents. So I'm just asking you to reconsider your decision since the Des Moines schools cannot meet my child's needs at the time and that there are other school districts that can. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Castle. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any additional speakers?
Not for this one, no.
Okay. Do board members have any questions or discussion related to this item?
Yes, Madam Chair, I did have a quick question, and I think I know the answer, but I just want to affirm. We have a number of coach stipend items included in the personnel recommendations on the consent agenda. And I assume that those coach stipends remain even though coaching and athletics have been suspended, correct?
I think that's a question for our superintendent, most likely.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion from board members? All right, Ms. Jenkins, please call the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
and Ms. Sawyer.
Yes. The consent items are approved 7-0. Ms. Castle or any other parent who may be impacted by open enrollment, we do have a staff member, and I'm completely sorry that I'm blanking on her name. I'm sure Dr. Ahart can help me with her name, but she should be reaching out to you within the next 24 hours with next steps. Dr. Ahart, who can they?
Yep. Eleanor Shirley.
Okay, yes, Ms. Eleanor Shirley will be reaching out to you within the next 24 hours. If not, please feel free to email me and I'll help make sure that that contact happens if you haven't heard from her by Thursday morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms. Bradley.
I apologize for the interruption. I'm getting several messages from individuals who are saying that they're not able to hear any sound for the meeting. I don't know whoever is responsible for that, if they are able to fix that, but I've gotten several messages within these last few minutes that there's no sound for them.
Are they streaming online?
I am not for sure. I've just heard it from a handful of people.
Okay. Ms. Jenkins, can we make sure that we get what am I trying to say? Can we make sure that we get I think your phone's ringing, Ms. Bradley. Can we make sure that we get the closed captions on this so that while they're working on the audio, we have that? Also, I'd just like to request that we do that at each meeting to help with accessibility for any community members who might find that helpful. Is that okay, Erin? Can we take care of that?
Oh, sorry, I was on the phone with someone who was telling me the same thing. Yes, I had let Kyle know that, and it's being recorded, so.
Okay, great. And please ask Kyle also to make sure we turn that on before each board meeting.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, it is on. I saw it when it was originally on there, so.
Okay, great. I was able to see it across my screen the last time and I'm not able to this evening. So the next item on our agenda is item D1, a public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item D1, public hearing for the sale of property at 230 37th Street? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce this matter?
Yes, I recommend the board hold a public hearing and approve the sale of property at 230 37th Street to Tanner Kinsler and Emily Kinsler in the amount of $405,000 following the public hearing.
All right. May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and the superintendent's recommendation?
Caldwell Johnson, move approval.
Second, Martirano.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Martirano. Are there any questions or discussion from board members? Tom, I just had a quick question that I think will just be helpful for anyone who's on the call tonight because they might not have joined us for one of these public hearings in the past. What happens to the money from the sale of property like this? Where does it go in our funding streams?
It would be, it will go, and I can't say for certain because we have a little research to do, but it would either go to our SAVE or our PEPL fund.
Okay,
so one
and
of
be
the
reinvested
facilities funds. Yeah.
Okay, and be reinvested into facilities. Okay, that's
Correct.
very helpful. Thank you. Are there any other questions or discussion by board members? All right, without any further questions or discussions, Ms. Jenkins, please call the roll call vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes. The vote is approved 7-0. The next item on our agenda is item E1, return to learn. Dr. Ahart, please introduce the matter.
Yes. As the public has been anxiously awaiting and attending to, we've been working on return to learn really since last spring. And at the point that we are now, to sort of sum it up, we began the year a week ago today in essentially 100% virtual with some exceptions for a few different programs and some IEP students primarily. We lost our move for an injunction from Polk County District Court was denied also a week ago today. And so after a few meetings between last Tuesday and today, where the boards had a discussion about how best to move forward, we are now attempting to bring some clarity to that for our entire community. What is the starting point for the discussion this evening is to continue in our virtual learning model through the end of first term and evaluate conditions prior to the start of second term to determine at that time whether to continue in virtual learning or to transition into some version of in-person, which at this point in time we would assume would be a hybrid model.
All right, so what is your recommendation, Dr. Ahart?
That is my recommendation.
Okay, is to continue, I'm sorry.
I guess I would just, yeah, I'll summarize, I'll repeat that, but to resume in our current virtual learning model and continue to reevaluate our conditions and bring students back into in-person learning, initially in the hybrid, and then eventually, the goal is to have all of our students back. Included in the agenda this evening under information is the return to learn metrics that the board has seen a few weeks ago, but have not been shared publicly until this time. And I would recommend that we use those metrics for assessing the safety of a return to in-person learning.
Okay, and I know, board, that it's probably difficult to separate this conversation from those metrics, but we're not actually voting tonight to approve or not approve those metrics. My understanding would be we would be doing that at a future meeting. Is that your understanding too, Dr. Ahart?
Yes, that's my understanding as well.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this is Terry Caldwell Johnson.
Yes.
I think, okay, I think it's fixed now. I was going to ask that we consider suspending our meeting until the sound is available. I was getting lots of feedback from the public about feeling a little out of the loop by not being able to hear, but it sounds as if it's been fixed.
Okay,
So
thank you for that, because while I was running the meeting, I wasn't able to monitor my email and my messages, so thank you. If it is not fixed, okay, yep, Phil is
It is
telling us now in the
working.
chat that it's now
Yep.
working. Okay, it looks like, yeah, I'm still getting a couple emails in, but hopefully if those members of the public that are on our stream could help put out that the sound should be working, and be sure to alert us if it does not, and we can, pause momentarily until, we have sound, because we want to make sure everyone has access to this conversation. This, however, is being recorded as well, but I understand you wanting the information in real time. Board colleagues, I think over the weekend I had sent out an email just requesting that based on the end of our conversation last Thursday, that you come tonight prepared to know where your comfortability was, first off, with being compliant or non-compliant. And I also recognize that that's not black and white necessarily, of you might have varying degrees of comfort based on that, based on the age of our students, or, a degree of, like, you might say that, 40%, or I don't know, I'm just throwing things out there to kind of color it for the public. So I would open this up to my board colleagues as to where we would like this conversation to continue from that standpoint, if anyone wants to jump in and off of that, so.
Madam Chair, I do have one other quick question, and I'm sorry, I
Yes.
should have brought this up when
Oh, you're fine.
we were discussing the metrics, but I know that there is a sentiment at this point for us to move forward in the virtual model through November. I am not, first of all, making a motion for that, because that is not what I am in support of tonight. But what I also believe to be true is that any subsequent recommendation regarding moving from virtual to hybrid, or some other plan that gets us to compliance for either K-8 or K-8 and 9-12, is predicated on the metrics that have been advanced. Is that correct? Or would be if they are approved?
Yes, yes.
So can I suggest that I think we would be, if there is a move by this board to move to virtual for the next 9 weeks, I think that we would be derelict in our duty if we didn't at the same time be actively focused on whether or not the metrics that would be used for subsequent discussions are those that we, number one, are in favor of, and number two, approve. So I would like for us to accelerate a discussion on the metrics so that we are not delaying that discussion in a way that delays any forward movement on any opportunity for us to move our students into the previously approved and discussed hybrid model.
Yes, so how would you, so are you making a recommendation for how we should structure our conversation this evening, or?
I don't think that the metrics is calendared even for us to discuss or approve tonight. I think it's just an information item. What I would recommend is that we get an item and a board meeting calendared as soon as possible to discuss the metrics.
Okay, so if what we wanted to do, I mean, we have a meeting calendared for tomorrow night. I don't know if it's possible for us to put the metrics on for tomorrow evening. I'm also, Terry, I'm listening to you, but I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull this together. Are you saying that you would like to continue our conversation on return to learn after we have metrics in place, or that just needs to happen pretty shortly after we make a decision on return to learn?
I think that the subsequent action on return to learn is predicated on these metrics as being the primary means for which we determine a readiness to return. So I'm not suggesting that we act on those tonight, nor that we delay any action that the board is willing to take. I'm just asking that we get that calendared as soon as possible so that we have clarity around the means by which we determine what return to learn will look like.
Okay, that makes sense. I
Can I
think,
get clarity? I'm sorry, but at this point, why would we not discuss the metrics this evening?
we can't vote on them. They're on for information only, so they're not even listed as a discussion item. So I don't think we can discuss them. Unless you have a different understanding of that, Rob. Because I know you've sat in this chair before too, so.
Yeah, but not in this kind of time. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm where Terry is to a certain degree, in that I think the metrics are so intricately woven into the concept of turning to learning in the building that would be challenging not to have a conversation about that.
Sorry, can everyone make sure their mics are muted? I'm getting some feedback. Thank you.
Just to pick up where I was saying, it'd be challenging to have that conversation without discussing the metrics, because I think that's really where the there's maybe some space. You know, I say this also because one of my top priorities for this meeting is not to drag this further beyond this meeting. I want to give the community some certainty and some closure when we walk out of this meeting. I read the metrics. I read Tom's supplemental information on them. I am prepared to have that conversation. If we can't legally have that conversation, I will defer. But I think we need to at least speak from a point of knowledge about them as we're having this.
If I may offer, I don't think it's inappropriate for us to discuss the metrics.
Okay.
I don't think we can vote on them, but we can certainly have a discussion about them. They're integrally related to this topic. So I think that would be absolutely acceptable.
So Madam Chair, can I offer maybe one other thought?
Yes, of course.
I agree that many of the people who are tuned in tonight came expecting to get a full and complete discussion and decision on the return to learn plan. So what I'd like to do, and while I understand that the two are woven together, our approval of the metrics tonight really does not preclude any other discussion or action of this board about what happens over the course of the next 9 weeks. I think the metrics really is a trigger for what happens after that, or how we plan during that time to be prepared for whatever the next steps are, which I'm hoping are indeed a return to physical learning in the building, or choice for people who are not interested in that and want to stay in the virtual mode. So I would suggest that we are better served by responding to those people who showed up tonight, who are interested in getting definitive action on what happens between now and November 9th. And if we decide we want to continue with the discussion on the metrics tonight, we're welcome to do that, or we can calendar that for tomorrow.
Okay. I think that makes sense. I don't know if I was fully comprehending what you were asking for us to do this evening, Terry. So I think it's fine for us to discuss the metrics. I did confirm, though, that Miriam Van Hukelum is on. So if we are edging into territory where we ought not to be related to how these are listed, I'm sure she will let me know. So with all of that said, do we want to start with a discussion of the metrics, or do we want to start with a discussion on what the next 9 weeks look like?
I prefer to focus on the 9 weeks.
Okay, then let's focus on the 9 weeks, knowing that if you need to refer to metrics, that is fair game for this conversation.
Kirsten?
Yes.
But I would like to, I think it's important for us to know about this compliance or non-compliance. We're currently not compliant right now anyway. And so I think that needs to be woven into our conversation somewhere. How we weave that in there, I'm not sure, but that's another conversation we need to have on top of what are things going to look like for us going forward. If we're looking at 9 weeks or not, is that something that we're sticking to, or are we looking for it to be shorter than that? So I think all of those things need to play out in our conversation, but I think that compliance, non-compliance does go into this conversation.
Okay.
Duana, I think to the extent that there is a desire to do something other than move for the term of return to learn for the next 9 weeks. I'm getting some feedback, sorry. That could happen in any motion that a board member chooses to make.
Okay.
Would any board member at this point like to make a motion to ground our discussion or conversation?
Kirsten, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Also, Erin just wrote us. She said we do have speakers for this, so I don't know where you want to weave them in it, but she just
Oh,
wrote
I'm
that.
sorry. Yep, we need to do speakers first. I apologize, board colleagues. Ms. Jenkins, can you please, I even had a note on my script to not forget to say that. Ms. Jenkins, can you please call our first speaker?
Will do. Mr. Tony Bell. Mr. Bell, are you on? All right, we'll come back. Jason Hahn.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jason Hahn, and I'm the father of 3 girls who currently attend Des Moines Public Schools. At the August 17th board meeting, I spoke, urging the board to reject the superintendent's proposed fully virtual start to the school year and to instead implement a plan that contained at least 50% in-person learning. The stated reason for this request was that the district's proposed plan was likely illegal and could result in a loss of credit for students learning under a non-approved plan. After this, the Des Moines Public Schools proceeded with the fully virtual model, requested a waiver from the State Department of Education, which was denied, and followed by the district filing suit against the state, initially seeking an injunction to permit fully virtual learning. While the larger case remains pending, the injunction has been denied. Similar injunctions have been denied in 2 other jurisdictions. Importantly, while Des Moines Public Schools communication to the public has highlighted areas where the judge agreed with the district, I believe it has been disingenuous in omitting key findings by the judge, including the following, which are direct from the ruling. The question is not whether the governor and the Department of Education has made a better policy decision than the 7-person elected board of the Des Moines School District. The question is which government body is authorized to make this decision. The judge continues. The problem with the Des Moines Public School District's request is that they cannot show a path to success on the merits of the law. He further continues with, there are no legal grounds in the bill to support the request made by the Des Moines Public School District in this case. I think that's pretty clear. The Des Moines Public School District has also recently indicated to the public that instruction received in the current fully virtual model will count as academic credit. This is perhaps true. And if so, it to me seems a simple matter for the Des Moines Public School District to ask the Department of Education to confirm this ability to grant credit in writing and to release this confirmation publicly. Trust but verify is the prudent course. I ask that the board direct the superintendent to request this confirmation. Failing this confirmation, it seems foolhardy for the public to place any credibility in the district's position, especially when considering the severe consequences of being wrong and the district's recent failure in correctly interpreting state law. Importantly, even if the Des Moines Public School District can grant credit for current learning, the lost days will still need to be made up at tremendous financial and societal cost. The district acknowledges as much in its lawsuit. Specifically, in its claim of irreparable harm, it notes, if the Des Moines Public School District proceeds with its current return to learning plan, it will not receive credit for days it provides remote-only instruction. As a result, it would be forced to make up these days to receive credit under Iowa Code Section 279.10. Dr. Ahart testified that it costs approximately $1.5 million per day to operate the district. It has approximately 2.3% excess spending authority, which would run out after 4 additional days, which I think was yesterday. If you go another 9 weeks, I think you're at about 70 million in the hole. So even if the district can grant credit for learning activities in the current year, which I believe is questionable, the end result of continuing to operate without an approved plan will likely be a district that loses accreditation and that is bankrupt. This scenario would be catastrophic for the community, the district, and the students. During the governor's September 10th press conference, she indicated a desire to work with the district to reach a compromise and move forward with an acceptable plan. This is an olive branch that should be taken up. Delay is not likely to improve the district's negotiating power.
1 minute.
Given the district's extremely limited chances of prevailing with its pending litigation, the community's strong desire to move to a hybrid model, the ability to accommodate families that want fully virtual learning, and most importantly, the catastrophic consequences of failure, it is time for the district to obey the law and move forward with a compliant plan approved by the Department of Education. Accordingly, I request that the board reject the superintendent's proposal to continue with virtual learning and instead direct the superintendent to immediately implement a compliant plan, including 50% in-person learning before further irreparable harm is done. Thank you, and I am happy to take any questions and I welcome your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hahn, for your comments. Ms. Jenkins, can you please call our next speaker?
Nicole Cable.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to address you again. I also spoke at the August 17th board meeting. I am the school nurse at Roosevelt High School. I've been with the district since 2015. I'm a parent to 2 students in the district, a 7th grader and a 10th grader who is a varsity athlete. I have been actively involved in much of the planning that has occurred around COVID, especially as it relates to health services during the summer. I have seen the struggle that has occurred between what is ideal and what is actual in terms of how we implement COVID planning and instructional methods. When I look tonight at what hat I'm wearing, I would tell you it's probably 1/3 school nurse, 1/3 parent, 1/3 community member. The state leadership would have us believe that it's a simple matter of doing the right thing and getting back to business as usual while the COVID pandemic continues. But I would argue that it's much more complex. The virtual learning model we have engaged in for the last week has allowed students to have a high quality educational experience 5 days a week that would continue unchanged regardless of what the conditions in the community look like. A hybrid model has been sold as a good balance of in-person instruction and safety measures, but the reality is much more complex. The state has neglected to talk about this, public health has neglected to talk about this, and we as a district probably haven't been as articulate about it as we can be. So if you are considering a return to a hybrid model tonight or in the future, I think we need to think seriously about what our obligations are as a district about how we're going to educate our families about the complexities of a hybrid model. In a hybrid model, we have to look seriously about the fact that our families will need to keep their students home if they are ill. Much lower bar for staying home if you're ill this year than in previous years. If our students are sent home ill because they have symptoms that may be suggestive of COVID, or if they have an ill family member who has tested positive for COVID in their household, they will be required to quarantine. If they have elected a hybrid model, they will not be able to enter the building. And so what once looked like a model of in-person instruction suddenly becomes something where they are bouncing between in-person and virtually every week or other week or every month. Individual classrooms may need to close sporadically because of identified close contacts as COVID spreads throughout the community and in our schools. Whole buildings may need to close for a few days, a few weeks, or longer. We've seen this already happen in our metro community with West Des Moines, even though school has only been in session 2 weeks. We have an obligation to ensure that families who are selecting a hybrid model understand that we are offering them an instructional path, but it is not a guaranteed access to in-person instruction every single day. and that they will need to play an equal role with us about how they are going to develop a family plan to care for their children if they're sent home ill or if a classroom or a building needs to close. That is the reality of working in a COVID pandemic, that we need to be clear with our families because the state has not. The state leadership does not want to talk about how messy this fall is going to get, but the public health officials have been clear that conditions will continue to worsen because we as a country have not been successful in reducing the COVID cases to a very low number as they have done in other countries. It will get worse as we move together. If we attempt to put multiple people back into a building, even with the best measures we can plan for, and we have attempted to plan for many, we will see an increase in cases. There will be a great deal of variability to the hybrid method, and our instructional offerings will suffer. So I know we're not compliant, but the virus is not going to give us a pass just because we come into compliance with the governor. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Cable. Ms. Jenkins, please call our next speaker.
Holly Kilborn O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me. I am a parent to an 8th grader at Merrill who's also taking central classes and who's also involved in various sports and activities. Our family strongly believes in public schools, and I appreciate the thoughtful and careful consideration of this school board and Dr. A. Hart that you have applied to this impossible situation. And I also want to echo earlier comments from the 545 segment that this first week of school has gone remarkably well. So thank you. I want to begin by just stating the obvious. None of this is ideal. No one gets exactly what they want in this situation. So tonight, as I understand it, this board is deciding between two impossible situations that are ideal for no one. There's solution one that's out of compliance with the state, in which we keep doing what we're doing, defaulting to 100% virtual, which provides the safest and most consistent teacher interaction, but as the previous speaker points out, puts us at terrible risk with a governor and a secretary of education who honestly seem hell-bent on destabilizing public schools and driving privatization. And then there's solution two that's compliant with the state, that defaults to families to hybrid, but it creates staffing and logistical impossibilities that will likely force students to spend 2 to 3 days a week on their own without a teacher in self-directed study. Plus, we all know COVID transmissions will become unmanageable. We've seen several schools across Iowa that have already shut down and are going virtual. We lost a special education teacher this summer and heard tonight that a bus driver has died. And we just heard Nurse Cable describe the very real impacts of COVID outbreaks. And we know also that COVID hits our racial and ethnic minority friends the hardest, who notably make up 60% of the DMPS student population. So yes, this board is facing an impossible decision between two terrible options. So personally, I just want to encourage the board members to stick with the 100% virtual, even though it is non-compliant. I believe 100% virtual is safest and provides the most consistent teacher interaction for students. And while it's risky, I hope this allows the board to buy time safely to address any accreditation issues. And I also want to note that we can and should continue to protest and push for access to sports and activities in the 100% virtual model. That is top of mind for a lot of parents. And of course, I agree that a controlled group of 50 to 60 kids should be able to do outdoor activities together, but it's absolutely a completely different scenario than thousands of people together in a building. So my last comments are directed to parents. So tonight, If tonight in this impossible decision, if this board moves forward with a hybrid or compliant version, parents, I want to encourage you to please opt into virtual if you can. While the compliant model defaults to hybrid, families can still choose to opt into virtual. And the more families that are able to opt into virtual, the better it's going to be for everyone.
1 minute.
Thank you. Some reasons why it will be better for everyone. Obviously, fewer people crammed into indoor buildings, the better for our entire community, but also more opt-ins to virtual learning relieves the pressure that we've heard about transportation and staffing, which makes it easier for these schools to meet the safety standards. And the more opt-ins to virtual, the more teachers will be allocated to virtual instruction, which means that instead of having students stuck 2 to 3 days on their own, working without teacher interaction, it will mean better teacher consistency and education quality for everyone, which is closer to what we all want. So thank you, board members and Dr. Ahart. I appreciate the time and I appreciate Des Moines Public Schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kilborn O'Neill, for your comments. Ms. Jenkins, can you please call our next speaker?
Justin Miner.
Hi, is everyone can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Over the summer, you all created the Return to Learn plan, and 70% of us chose to send our kids to school. And now you've had us vote again. We can't just vote until we get the results that we more prefer. Sometimes we have to accept the will of the people, and even if we don't agree with it. Recently, the Los Angeles County Public Health Director was caught on tape saying she would not open schools until after the presidential election. I sincerely hope that this board isn't even contemplating trying to implement something so obviously political. We were ready to send our kids back to school in July, so now is not the time to wait. They should be in school next week. Your plan was written months ago. The teachers are in their classrooms. Let's implement it and let's go. We have them watching YouTube video after YouTube video on Canvas and calling it an education. These teachers are doing the best they can, but it's not an education. The American Academy of Pediatrics states children should be limited to 2 hours of screen time a day. Now we've got them staring at their laptop screens for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. I know of a child whose parents have to work, so they take their child with them and the child sits in the parent's car, hooked on the office's Wi-Fi, and literally gets her education in the backseat of a car in a parking lot. My daughter has heard domestic violence taking place in other children's homes on unmuted Teams meetings. Let's mask up and go to school. Let those at high risk teach the virtual students, and the ones who want 100% virtual absolutely should be given that choice. But COVID-19 is here for the long haul. There's no magic bullet that's going to eliminate it from our society. We've got to get these kids back into school and not fail them. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Mr. Miner. Ms. Jenkins, can you please call our next speaker?
Yep, Valerie Cohen.
Hello. Good evening. I think most of the board already knows me. My name is Valerie Cohen, as was already said. I'm a Des Moines Public Schools parent, a school bus driver, and I'm also the co-founder of Each Pair Iowa, Iowa's mobile COVID-19 empty shoe memorial. I take this pandemic extremely seriously, not just because I am a moderate to high risk individual, but because I have already been touched by this pandemic in multiple ways, losing multiple people in my life within the state and outside of the state. And I think if we wait as Iowans to take it seriously until it touches each of us individually, it will be too late. I have a very unique perspective to view this situation, and I'm here tonight to ask you all to stay the course on full virtual. My daughter is an 11th grader with ADD, and in July, she, because it had to be more of her decision than mine at that point, chose to go with a hybrid. but it was a different time. It's not a matter of vote till we get the answer that we're looking for. It was a different time. And indeed, it feels almost like a different state. And so we have chosen full virtual now. As I said, I am moderate to high risk, and I do not want to leave my job at DMPS. I have but 5 minutes, as I understand it, to speak to you. So I'm going to dispense with some of the formalities and jump right into info on this. Tom, I'm even going to speak to the issue. I'm not going to speak to the issue that I contacted you about earlier today. I'm going to just rib you for a moment here and say that, I know that this pandemic does not always allow us enough levity. So I'm just going to say it like this, that Tom, ever so briefly, I, as a union steward and a staunch steward at that, I know we've often been on opposite sides, and we've learned and come accustomed to regarding each other with a very hairy eyeball. But on this, I am really with you, Tom. Boy, oh boy, am I with you. To staying the full virtual on this, because the parameters that Reynolds has set forth really just unequivocally are unwise and unsafe. And there is going to be more of a staffing problem from my peers, I know, if we continue to march down the road of hybrid. While we are quote unquote fully virtual, we have been serving a very small number of students with extreme needs. And I've seen what I sadly can say is evidence that we can't be fully and completely safe, no matter how hard we try. There are no great options here. I'm sorry to say it, but the best of the options we have is full virtual. Our mission as a district, becoming the model of urban education, well, let's see. Let's do that. Let's be that model of urban education. And that requires, in this case, being more nimble and innovative. There are no great options in Polk County right now. And it's not DMPS's fault. It's our governor's fault. And I'm not cold to the unique situations and issues of the refugee and ELL children that recently recovered as needing hybrid and in-person education. I know a number of their families myself. And they actually have extreme risks too. And some of them don't even want to go to their building because they have multi-generational households that don't necessarily have health care. Recently, we had a staff member whose family member died because they didn't have the proper papers and didn't want to go to the emergency room. So let's take our operations staff that are not necessarily working full hours. Let's go in person to sites with teacher team members. Our operations staff members speak all of those home languages. We have a pool of innovative and nimble opportunity here. Our operations staff members, my peers, have surprised the heck out of me recently. They have learned computers and technology in a way that I would have never thought they could. And you know what? They speak all the languages that the students in our district speak. Let's have them help us. Let's have us, our district staff, help us. Go to the sites, meet with the families, help people that way to get them familiar with the technology. We just started this school year. We can do this. I guess I have to cut right here.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Ms. Cohen, Valerie. It was nice to hear them again. Do we have any further speakers, Ms. Jenkins?
I will try Mr. Tony Bell again.
Okay.
Mr. Bell, are you on? He was the only one, so we are done.
Okay. If you happen to notice that he hops in like on the thing, Aaron, let us know, and if it's the will of the board, we can open back up public comment. But at this time, with no further public comments, I will circle us back to starting our conversation. Board colleagues, where would the board like to start?
I guess I would like to just start with some of the feedback I've been getting. It's been overwhelmingly supportive of staying virtual from our staff. Parents, it's been closer, but I'd still say tips in favor of staying virtual. I've been in favor of staying virtual for months now, and that's what I plan to be doing tonight. But I do just want to address the idea of choice. I've heard a lot of people say we need to give the parents a choice. I said this last week. I've said this in many emails. I've said this to some of you. But when we're talking about choice, we need to remember that this is not a discrete action. I'm not choosing to eat an apple at the expense of someone else. If I'm choosing to send my kid to school, I mean, as a district, we have to accept these people. Therefore, we're choosing to have a teacher there. We're choosing to have an administrator there. We're choosing to have transportation and food service. Those people lose their choice. Now, in an ideal world, we'd have enough of a ratio that the parents who want to go in person and the teachers who wanted to teach in person matched up perfectly. But the numbers we're getting back does not suggest that to be the case. And yeah, someone mentioned, the school in West Des Moines shut down, a school in Boone County is shut down. I just read about a football team in Johnston shut down. We're not special. Des Moines is not immune. Des Moines is not special. This will get to us. We will be back online sooner rather than later, and that's doing a disservice to everyone. The planning that's gone into this first week, I've heard overwhelmingly how well this week is going. Now, I'm sure I'm not hearing from everybody. I'm sure there's, all those caveats, but the feedback I'm getting is this is working better than expected. And that's because our staff has put in the time. We bought them 2 weeks by delaying the start of the year. They've put in the time to create something that's going to give this a real chance. Yeah, and well, I guess that's the end of my little rant there. I've got several more that I'm ready to roll on if I need to, but I do just want to ask this question. When we talk about how much better in-person learning is, that's always been a central assumption of what we talked about. I want people to think about what is it about in-person learning that makes it so much so much better? Why is that superior? And as a person who taught for many, many years, I'll tell you, it's going to talk to a kid one-on-one. It's having clubs after school. It's coaching sports. It's all these interactions. It's all the things that are not possible in a classroom right now behind a mask and a shield. Some teachers have hung shower curtains in their room and they can't get plexiglass. If I were teaching, I wouldn't be able to go desk to desk to work with a kid one-on-one. That's not within the scope of safety that we'd have to implement to make this thing. We can't make this thing work is where I'm at, but to give it any kind of shot, all the things that make in-person education great would have to be restricted. So therefore, I wonder how much better would even the best hybrid model be? And I'll stop there.
Madam Chair, if I could, just
Please.
I think owing to good board decorum, I'd like to make a motion, and I would like to make this motion. I will say reluctantly, but to start the conversation and to get us on our usual practice. So I will move that the board direct the district to create a plan to begin hybrid or offer a hybrid in addition to virtual, dependent upon public health metrics.
I'm just writing that down, Rob. All right, so I'm going to read this back to you and make sure that I've got this. You would like to make a motion to direct the district, so Dr. Ahart, to create a plan, which I'm assuming you mean implement, because we have a hybrid plan. So to create a plan to begin to offer hybrid in addition to virtual, dependent on public health metrics.
Yes, and I'm fine with the implement instead of create on the motion.
Do we have a second on the motion?
Bradley, I second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Ms. Bradley. Board members, I open it up to your consideration and questions.
Madam Chair, can you read the motion again?
Yes, I will. Dr. Ehart, what were you going to say?
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question.
Okay.
I think I know the answer, but just for everyone's clarity, Rob, the hybrid plan, you're saying a hybrid plan compliant with the current state guidance of 50% of instruction happening within the period of every 2 weeks, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna, if it's okay with you, Mr. Barron, when I read back the motion, I'm gonna add in that detail. All right, so Ms. Caldwell Johnson asked what the motion on the table was. The motion that I have as written is to direct the district to implement a plan to begin to offer a compliant hybrid model in addition to virtual, dependent on public health metrics. Did I get your motion correct, Mr. Barron?
That is consistent with the intent of my motion.
Okay, I think we got it now. A lot of scribbles on my sticky note, but we got it now. So I would open up this motion for discussion or further conversation from my board colleagues.
If I could,
Go ahead, Mr. Barron.
want to explain why I'm doing this. And the first thing I want to say is I am not certain what my vote is on my motion. But I believe it's important to start this discussion. What I'm trying to bring forth is something that is respective of both the parents and community members that we're hearing from that want to return to the building, with the need to protect our staff. I've spent every waking moment on this, talking to a lot of people, and I want to make one part of this clear. Is my suggestion of this motion is not about anyone other than the students, staff, and their families of the school district and the community members that we serve. I think we have to leave this meeting with a plan to move forward that speaks to the needs of our community. And as I've been telling people for a long time, we need to separate that from what we are hearing from the state of Iowa. First and foremost, we serve our community. Doing that is admittedly impossible and turns my stomach to even put that motion on the table. But this is the conversation we need to have, and it needs to be debated. And honestly, this is not a 7-0 conversation. This is a conversation that I hope will start and learn more about ourselves as we end it. And I'll have more to add later, and I look forward to hearing from my colleagues on this.
Clarifying question then, when you say public health metrics, are you talking about our proposed metrics, or are you talking about the state's proposed metrics?
Well, I am not talking about the state's proposed metrics. I think that there is no justification for those metrics. I am very comfortable with the district's metrics. I know that we're not necessarily voting on those metrics as a standalone item. What I would say is I want to start the conversation and discuss making it contingent upon metrics. For me, there's two ways of looking at this. You know, if you're going to bring people back in the building, do you bring them back in the building date certain, come hell or high water, or you bring them back date certain pending metrics? And I am very much in the camp that you bring them back pending public health metrics.
So basically what you're saying is come up with a plan that's ready to roll, but not until we meet metrics that we find suitable.
That is what I am bringing forth.
Would you like to clarify your motion on the metrics at all to make that more clear for the board? Like metrics, you know, approved by the board or something like that? If not, that's fine.
I would not at this point in time.
Okay.
And I'm open to discussion upon that, but you know, per management limitation 211, I think that we delegate that to the superintendent right now. And if we want to take ownership of those metrics, we can, but that needs to be something we discuss.
Through policy, yes. Okay. For anyone who's following along at home, if you're looking for the metrics that any of the board members are referencing, they're located under item F1 on the board agenda, which you can find from the agenda section on the school board website. Okay, go ahead, further board members. I don't know.
Well, I do just want to address this idea of serving the community, and we need to keep in mind that yes, that is our number one job. But this decision doesn't affect our community; it affects the entire metro region. Our 33,000 kids and our 5,000 staff, almost to a person, go to a house with someone else in it. Many of those houses aren't in Des Moines. We've got people in Ankeny and Altoona and West Des Moines and Newton and wherever. Any of the, I mean, if we opened up all 60 of our buildings, that's 60 potential hotspots within a 20-mile radius, but that's going to spread outward very, very quickly. So when we're talking about community, we need to think on a little bit bigger level than just our own neighborhoods.
Madam Chair, I want to thank my board colleague for advancing a motion for us to at least begin the discussion. And I guess this gets a little bit into the metrics, because I think the metrics component of this motion is probably the one where we likely may have the biggest challenge, but also is a place where we have no definitive board decision at this point. And what I might suggest, which I think creates a much more defensible position when it comes to metrics, is for us to maybe request that we convene as a board our own team of medical experts to help identify those metrics. So it's not presumed that what has been advanced is either the opinion of our superintendent or the best guess of our superintendent. And while I know there has been some consultation with medical experts on this, I think that really feeling as if we have some independence in not only identifying what those metrics should be, but also determining what those metrics are that we endorse as a board, not only gives that position a level of credibility that it might lack at this point, but I think it also speaks to public trust and public confidence in whatever we use as our measure for return to learn outside of the virtual setting. So I know I'm extending a little beyond the motion that's on the floor, but I do think that it really is predicated on metrics that we have to have some certainty are not only objective and independent, but also have a way of engendering a level of trust that I think is critical relative to our public.
Okay. I'm trying to pull up the language from our latest policy, which I'm hoping has been updated on the website because that's where I'm going to look for it.
Yes, it's updated.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna go look at it. I just want to make sure before we discuss that any further, Terry, that we know whether or not that's going to require policy change or not. So I'm looking at 211. And currently our policy reads that the superintendent shall not operate without a plan, including metrics to address the transition between hybrid, virtual, or on-campus instruction informed by school reopening guidelines offered by the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization, including social and physical distancing measures. So I think if what you want is a board endorsed plan, I don't know if you mean that if that's the same as a board voted plan, but I think we might need to change that policy language, which we can do at any time. But I think that helps to ground the board's conversation around that item too.
And to the point about the validity of the metrics that Tom put forth in agenda item F, I do want to note that their sources are based on Harvard University, Brown University. We're drawing on international medical experts here to put these forward. I mean, I spent much of my afternoon reading these things and trying to make a good judgment on them. And I know that the more people we talk to, the more opinions we're going to get. If we have an issue with them, I think we need to discuss what the issue is with the metrics. But I am content with these metrics as he's presented them to us.
I'm not going to argue that point, Rob. What I would offer is that the opportunity for us to feel confident that our public has the same level of confidence in them as well, I think is as important as the sources. I'm not questioning the sources at all, but I do think that, again, we've not had this discussion on the metrics, nor have we had an opportunity to hear fully what they entail and what's included. So I'm just really sort of trying to center us back on the motion that you've advanced, which is really predicated on those metrics. And so I'm feeling that we're a little out of sequence here, but that's why I raised the issue. I am not trying to be difficult at all. I'm just trying to make sure that we are centered on a key piece of the motion that I think we have to be comfortable with before we can affirm that this is where we want to go.
Tom, would this maybe be a good time for you to talk about where you arrived at those metrics? Or from where you arrived, I mean?
Sure. I want to remind everyone that this is a new disease, and we continue to learn more about COVID-19 and its impacts on everyone who contracts it, especially our younger people who were largely protected from it, at least in the United States, because of many schools, if not almost all schools, being closed down for the last part of the last school year. And then summertime typically does not have large convenings of students in the same space. So we're learning more and more about the impacts of COVID-19 on students. And in fact, we're learning more and more about the long-term impacts, health impacts on individuals of all ages that have contracted the disease, recovered, but still have lingering impacts. So I bring that up just to preface that there's certainly not a comprehensive compendium of resources that you can consult with to come up with these. So what I've attempted to do is pay attention to what's been happening in other states, what other states have created for metrics. Not all states do have metrics. Some of it is at the state level, as it is in Iowa. Some of it is at the individual district level. And so I've tried to review those. I've consulted with on a regular basis with both Dr. Michael Osterholm, who the board met a couple of months ago, and with Dr. Larry Brilliant, and I've done a lot of reading. That's how I'm spending most of my nights, reading about this. So there are more sources that I could provide to the board, but essentially what I was attempting to do was two things. One, determine what most generally agreed upon health experts would agree was relatively safe conditions for schools to reopen, K-12 schools to reopen in some form of in-person instruction. And again, there are many, many variables in that, age of the building, the number of students served in the building, et cetera. And then also setting the metrics such that when we return to in-person, that we're relatively confident that we can stay in in-person instruction for an extended period of time. That's been one of the challenges that the team and I, and in fact districts around the state, have been wrestling with as it relates to the state rules, which require 50% in-person instruction in every 2-week period, and also that the length of a waiver for virtual instruction is also 2 weeks. The transition into and out of virtual into some form of in-person instruction creates uncertainty and chaos, and we certainly lose continuity and any momentum that our teachers and students have created collectively. So my goal was to create some metrics that that through experiences around the world have demonstrated would allow for a more than even chance of safely reopening schools without reigniting an outbreak, and also being able to stay in that in-person setting for some period of time, so that we're not getting whiplash going back and forth. But I will also offer that there are as many opinions probably as there are experts, and I am not a public health expert, although I will say that I've been blessed to have access to some of the best in the world, and I'm confident that the metrics that I've proposed would both allow for a reasonable modicum of safety for in-person instruction, and a better than reasonable chance that we would be able to remain in in-person instruction for a significant period of time before conditions would, according to the metrics, push us back into fully virtual.
Thanks, Tom, for outlining that. Board members, do you have where would you like to go with your conversation next? I know we're all quiet because we're thinking, but I want us to move this conversation forward as well.
There's several members we haven't heard from. I will defer to them.
Kirsten, this is Dewana. So
Yes.
I do believe in the language that we have right now. My concern, I think now, and I've been all over the place, so I think my concern with the metrics and us doing anything further with them is if we will ever land on a spot where we agree with them at all. And I think that, Tom has taken the time to go through these metrics. We trust the superintendent and his team to do those kinds of things. And so for me, I'm just kind of erring on the side of, I don't know if I want to go down that road, because I don't know if we'll get to a sweet spot where we will actually agree on those metrics. And so I say, since they've put in the work to provide the metrics that are currently had, I would be comfortable with using those metrics.
I would say for me, the challenge becomes, are these metrics lofty? And I don't know. I'm not a public health expert. I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't know. My concern lies with, and Tom, I'm trying to see if you have given us updated numbers of where we are at, but I'll just, and my understanding is that we have to meet all three, right? Like you're saying all three have to be met?
That's the idea. That's how they were designed. Yeah.
Okay. And so that's why I'm like, I don't know how these work with one another to know, are these what we should be looking at? I mean, obviously, you know, all we got from the state was a positive 14-day positivity rate and absenteeism. Well, we can't look at absenteeism because we're not in a classroom. I mean, we could definitely look at it based on whether or not our kids are connecting online or not, which I hope that data is being collected because I would really be interested in seeing it. But I just, like, I wonder if we're going to get to a point, like, what if we get to the point that we're so close and we languish and we still don't get our kids back? And I will tell you, I've been wrestling with this. Anybody who thinks this is an easy decision, I hope you know otherwise, because my husband will tell you I'm talking about return to learn plans in my sleep. Like this isn't normal. But the one thing I continue to wrestle with is, what are we doing on behalf of our kids and the future of our kids? And the number one reason school systems exist, if anybody knows that, if you listen to AJ, it's for student outcomes. And I know over a year ago, the board put in the effort, they listened to the community members, you guys developed your SMART goals, which really fall around early learning or early literacy for all third graders, for Black males, and an algebra goal for Black males. And I happened to just pull out our reports from when we last looked at these goals. We didn't meet benchmarks. We didn't meet our performance measure benchmarks and everything. We didn't meet goals. And understanding that, obviously, we were hit with the pandemic. I think the last reports we had seen for our reading goals were in the winter, so we never did get to assess and look at any spring data. The algebra goal, I mean, obviously taking into consideration we were at a point of a pandemic. My concern is, not only did we not meet our goals then, but we have kids who have faced a 6-month learning loss. And now we continue to add to that. And while everybody says virtual is great, it's not working for everyone. And so as a district, the one thing I also look at is, I happen to go on our education philosophy, and we talk about what we want, right? And we say, and I'm looking at my notes here, that the website states we want our kids to demonstrate a proficiency in literacy, math, and science. Since students who are below grade level will show growth each year, we talk about gaps between the lowest and highest performing students, and that will be eliminated, including disproportionality by race, socioeconomic status, and or zip code. I'm concerned, are we contributing to the achievement gap for our kids? And when this is all done, we as a district are going to have to look at how we're going to catch these kids up. And so what are we doing for those kids? What are we doing for our most at risk? And it may even be beyond the kids that are, we outline in our management limitation, the kids who, special education, 504s, ELL, those that are 2 years behind. But sometimes we even have kids that are not within that framework that we still need to reach and we're missing. And so my concern is, what happens if at the end of 9 weeks, we're kind of close, we're so close in the metrics, but we're not there. Sorry, we're 1/10 of a point off or whatever that is, we can't do it. That are we holding ourselves to be so stringent and not allow flexibility? Because I too believe kids have got to be in a classroom. We're hearing that from parents too. We're not hearing roses from everybody. And so I want to acknowledge that, because I know that it's a challenging situation. And I'm wrestling with this because I'm looking for, how are we going to meet the future of our kids? And I'm concerned we're contributing to their achievement gap. And so I just leave it at that. I don't have an answer right now, but rather the metrics for me are a big sticky wicket, because I don't want to be so prescriptive that we miss what we should be doing for our kids.
I just want to related to what you're talking about, Kelly, I just want to raise up part of our policy, since we've already read part of it tonight related to our metrics. I think you bring up another piece of that policy, which is that the superintendent shall not operate without a plan for assessment related to student outcomes goals or without adequately addressing the needs of students identified with IEPs, 504s, or ELL goals, or those students who are 2 or more years deficit in math and or reading. And to my knowledge, Dr. Ahart, I don't know if the board has seen a plan yet or seen, a report yet on that. We haven't really established a timeline. Do you have any estimate on when the board might expect to receive that information?
Yeah, if I may, I would like to address a few points that were raised by Kelly. The metrics. So I've been tracking these metrics since late August. We've actually made progress as a community in all 3 metrics. The last metric, the RT, which is strongly supported as an effective metric, not started, but on August 28th, we were at 1.73. And at present, as of yesterday, it was 0.88. So we've been in the green on my sheet since September 4th on that metric.
Sorry to interrupt, but Tom, as you're laying out where we are with those, can you just give a 2-sentence explanation of what each one is? So RT is the.
You bet. So RT is the effective transmission rate of the virus in the community. And so what you're looking for is an RT of less than 1. At 1, the transmission continues, but it's under control. If the higher you are above 1, the less in control that the virus is in the community. If you're less than 1, then it is effectively, according to this measure, which by the way lags by 5 or 6 days because of how it's calculated. If it's less than 1, then spread is indicated to be somewhat under control, and the mitigation efforts in the community are having a positive impact. Metric 2, positivity rate, is actually the metric that my 2 key consultants, Dr. Brilliant and Dr. Osterholm, didn't recommend using because they said it was a bit redundant, but I thought it was important to include it because it's the only metric having to do with COVID spread. And so I thought that was something that was more relatable. And so I just based that on what the WHO would say is evidence of containment of the spread in the community, which is a declining trend in the positivity rate and a positivity rate at below 5%. Now on August 28th, the positivity rate as reported by the Iowa Department of Public Health for Polk County was at 10.4%. Yesterday it was 7.4%. So significant progress has been made. And then the last is the metric of new cases per 100,000 on a 7-day. By the way, the positivity rate is figured on a 14-day rolling average. The metric, the first metric, the positive cases per 100,000 in the county, population in the county, and we're shooting for 1 or less. We're currently at 18.96. We were at 24.52 on August 28th. That rate has gone down as low as 12.29 on the 10th, and it's creeping back up. But a combination of those 3 metrics give us a pretty comprehensive picture, not just of what the virus is doing in our community at present, but also gives us some degree of confidence that when we hit those metrics, we're at a safe position for an extended period of time change mode of instruction. I didn't want to get too buried in that, but as Kelly lifted up, does that mean if we're 1/10 off on one metric that we wouldn't reopen? I don't think that's the case. I don't think you can establish metrics that are that precise, but I certainly think it gives us a gauge. And the reason I thought it was important to establish metrics that that we could support as a district is that the metrics that we have from the state at this point in time are a 15 to 20% positivity rate that I can find no one with any public health background to support. And the second metric is a 10% absenteeism rate of our students due to a COVID-19 infection. And if we have 70% of our student body in some form of in-person instruction, we wouldn't qualify for a waiver until over 2,200 of our students contracted COVID-19. And that's not something that, for me, I felt comfortable with advancing. So I'm certainly not saying that my metrics are perfect. A lot of work went into it. I can certainly understand well-meaning, intelligent people disagreeing with them. But I do have confidence that they give us information to safely move forward in a manner that would allow us to stay in a change of instructional modality once we hit those. In terms of the your question, Kirsten, about meeting the needs of our students and in that policy, we have lots of opportunity to move forward with that. I don't think I'm going to be prepared to advance something to the board until we have a bit more clarity about where we're headed, at least through the next several weeks. There are opportunities that we intend to take advantage of. We're 1 week into the school year. We've actually completed 6 days as of today. And we're serving a number of students in person so far, but we certainly have opportunity to serve more. But coordinating schedules and ensuring that we're not creating additional gaps when we increase the amount of in-person services is something that we're going to have to be very careful about. So when we're through with this next step in determining what return to learn looks like, those measures can be forthcoming very shortly thereafter.
Okay. Can you give the board the scope, though, of what those services have looked like thus far in a completely virtual model?
Yeah, so far, all of the students that are served at our school at Orchard Place are receiving in-person instruction, as you might guess, as well as the students that are served in our focus program. We have a number of students with IEPs that are receiving instruction for part of the week in person at their schools, mostly at their schools. We have our students who are taking courses at Central Campus who are receiving in-person instruction for those courses, and we're providing some small number of ELL students with some in-person services. As we continue to assess who's actively engaged, who is not actively engaged, who's having particular challenges with either their home environment or connectivity issues or particular learning challenges that a student may have, we'll continue to increase those in-person services. But we wanted to get a very solid start on this all virtual plan and continue to make improvements as we move forward. And as I've said, even from back in June, however it is that we start the year, ideally we'll have all of our students back together in school in real time every day. And certainly, even if we're not in a fully in-person environment, our goal is to continue to have a steady increase in the amount of in-person instruction that our students are receiving, while ensuring that we're not creating any gaps that don't already exist in starting the school year fully virtual.
Madam Chair, I just have a quick question as a follow-up on the metrics. So I know that the state has already identified what they believe to be the metrics for those districts that can, in fact, submit and be approved for a waiver because they've reached a threshold, I believe, of 15%. And I know we all agree that that is unreasonably high and certainly not what we're interested in at all. But I guess my question is, and maybe I should preface this by saying we're already operating outside the law. We are not in compliance with state law. So I have to assume that our assumption is that we can establish our own metrics because we're already out of compliance. So in other words, I'm not for sure we have the authority to establish our own metrics, but my assumption is because we're already operating outside of state law and compliance with state law, that our metrics are ones that we're going to go with just because.
I'm sorry, was that a question for me, Terry?
I'm just putting it out there. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what our authority is for establishing our own metrics.
Sure.
And I have to assume that that authority is based on the fact that we're already operating outside of state law. So we're just going to continue to push the boundaries.
I was going to say, I would offer, I think there are other metro districts around the surrounding area from Des Moines that have also established their own metrics that match like various pieces of the return to learn. I believe Waukee, West Des Moines, Norwalk, Johnston, and I believe Ankeny have their own metrics. And I don't know what pieces of, you know, the governor's language are included in those, but I do know that they each, because I haven't read all of them, but I'm fairly certain they've all developed some sort of, you know, metric around there.
Yeah, but they're all also currently compliant.
I would add, I did talk to board members from two of the districts that are surrounding us over the weekend. One of them being Waukee, and my understanding of their non-compliant, if you will, plan is that what it does is if their county positivity rate gets to 10%, that triggers a meeting. It doesn't mean that they'll move on anything or make some drastic changes. It just means they'll meet to talk about it. Very similar to what West Des Moines did a few weeks ago. If you recall, they had a meeting. I think it came down to Polk County hit that threshold. That triggered a meeting for them to talk about it. I don't recall them making, I mean, obviously they hadn't gone all virtual or anything. They just, so that was my understanding of those metrics, at least for those two districts. And again, that's probably more consultation, but when the Waukee school board member explained it to me, it was not that it triggered they're going, you know, automatic into virtual. It just meant they were going to have a conversation.
With the emergency management policy that we unanimously approved on August 17th, it states that the superintendent will follow progress measures that are identified and a monitoring calendar that's implemented. So with that, is it the expectation that we as a board are creating those progress measures and monitoring calendar? I was under the impression that that particular emergency management policy was something that those are guardrails for Tom to follow. And you bring up a very good point, Kelly, is at what point, at what frequency are we looking at these numbers? Are we looking at them daily? Are we looking at them weekly? I personally think that 9 weeks is way too too great a time frame to wait to review these data. And I am incredibly worried about our highest risk students and our highest need students, and would advocate for a much shorter monitoring calendar based on that policy that we've put into place.
Ms. Martirano, did you want to suggest a time frame or?
I think first, my question regarding the intent of the policy of, are those guardrails for Tom to follow, or do we identify and determine, one, the measure, and two, the calendar? Sorry, still learning the policy work.
No, that's okay. So these are guardrails that we've implemented for Tom. The expectation is, and I remember when we were doing, it's been a while since we've added like whole new policy language, but I thought we had also adopted a policy that gave Tom a certain amount of time to have information to the board around when he would come into compliance. I can't remember if it was 30 or 45 days, but that's outlined elsewhere in policy, and I can try to find it. At least I thought we had implemented that. So yes, I believe Tom does need to let us know like what his plan is to become compliant. And also, you know, this needs to be added to our monitoring calendar, which I've not seen any information, I don't believe, and we can address that with Tom tomorrow in agenda planning about that. Does that answer your question, Kim? Okay. Did you want to recommend any amount of time before we monitor again? I think when we talked in our work session, I think we talked about looking at the data in 6 weeks to have it go into effect at the beginning of second quarter, but that's not part of the motion that we have on the table currently.
I think that if there's a frequency question, or if we want to extend the action that we're interested in taking this evening, that doesn't preclude a subsequent motion that allows us to begin to create the framework for how we move forward, and not only what that looks like, but also frequency of monitoring, as well as other actions that we may wish to put in place as it pertains to the next 9-week period.
Okay, and I'll lean on your advice and Mr. Barron's advice, as you've both sat in this chair before. I don't know if I don't think we've done a motion of this nature since I've been sitting in this chair where we might be modifying it on the fly. So if anyone would like to modify our motion, or can we have 2 motions on the table at one time?
Perhaps a friendly amendment to the motion?
Yeah, I would say probably not a friendly amendment, probably an amendment to the motion. But I also think that maybe for the purpose of being true to, I think, what Rob was intending with his motion, if there is subsequent action that we believe we would like to take that further supports the motion, then that could be advanced in a separate motion. It doesn't necessarily have to be tacked on to this motion.
Okay, so I guess my question for process wise is, do we make that motion like right now, or do we wait till we close this motion?
You take action, you finish discussing this motion, take the action, and then you open the floor for a subsequent motion.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to leave a note then, Kim, to come back to that. So if you have some ideas, we'll open that back up to kind of define our work moving forward once we've settled the motion on the table.
Thank you.
Okay. So to remind the board, because we've talked about several things, I'm just going to read the motion again. I did put it in the chat, but I'm going to read it again just so that both us and our public are aware of the motion. The current motion on the table is made by Rob Barron and seconded by Dwana Bradley. Is I move that the board direct the district to implement a plan to begin to offer a compliant hybrid model in addition to virtual, dependent on public health metrics.
And that motion is absent even understanding what those public health metrics are, which are yet to be decided, correct?
Well, I think, let me make sure that I'm summarizing an earlier piece of our conversation, that according to our current policy that we have in place, the plan for the metrics to transition between each of the modes of education has been delegated to the superintendent because he shall not operate without that plan, which makes it the superintendent's plan. So the board, according to this plan, at this moment has no intentions of approving the metrics or not approving the metrics, but only saying that Tom must have them. And I believe we had also talked about, it's not outlined in this policy, but I believe too that, you know, it was the intention, and Tom has voiced this several times as well, to have these metrics posted and to have kind of a public scorecard similar to the way we track our other board goals about where we are in relation to the metrics.
I would add that, well, with that, maybe take a look at some of the surrounding districts. I know I looked at Waukee and Johnston, and I mean, they have a dashboard that is in relation to looking at their COVID positives and their quarantine numbers, that this should also be included. So the public can daily monitor what that number looks like, what those numbers look like.
And Tom, you can weigh in, but I believe we had talked about that. I don't remember if it was in a work session or if it was with you and Dwana and myself, but I know that we had discussed that. And I do know currently if we're in a virtual, it's going to be a little bit harder for us to track quarantining students and positives just because they're not in our buildings on a daily basis. So I imagine Polk County is tracking those.
Yeah, and we absolutely intend to have a public facing dashboard, and we don't have that for the metrics yet because we had not had the discussion at the board table yet, but we're prepared to do that when it pleases the board.
So I'm also because this is a hang up for me. This is a challenge for me. And so my understanding then, Tom, you said, I mean, those can be fluid. They could be definitely if we're a 1/10 of a point, or I mean, just so close, but maybe not quite there. It's the understanding that yes, we can dial this in and we are going back. But I guess how will the public know that? How will we know? We have some flexibility in this number, but you know, we're kind of getting there. I'm just trying to understand better.
How,
like,
yeah,
that languishing. I don't want us to be here in December and we still don't have kids back in buildings. I'm concerned if that's what we're looking at.
I'm going to step away for just one moment, Ms. Bradley, if you would please move the conversation forward if I'm not back.
Yeah, I would just say that the creation of the metrics were not informed by anything except how do we determine when conditions in our community would provide for a safe reentry to school. So I didn't have a timeline tied to that. So if there's a date certain that or a target date that the board wants students to be back in person, I don't think we can really tie that to metrics. But on the point of when would we pull the trigger, so I've been monitoring these daily, and if and when the board approves or whatever metrics the board approves or supports, we would have that on a public facing dashboard, so folks could check that out themselves. But how I had envisioned this working is that when we're approaching, I would certainly be, you know, actively informing the board that we're approaching the appropriate levels, and then I would recommend to the board that we re-enter in-person instruction with the idea that I would not make the call any later in any given week, any later than Wednesday, with the intent of re-entry happening the following Monday.
And so kind of going then vice versa, like we have our metrics are down, looks like, you know, things are pretty good in the community. Something happens, like even that 1/10 of an inch, if we're over, you know, we've gone past our, let's say 5%. I continue to fall in that positivity rate because I've been monitoring Polk County too. And so we go up to maybe 5.5, like, oh my gosh, are we now going virtual again?
Well, no, because how I had crafted it, and you can see that in the document, that once we re-entered, then the metrics change a bit to allow for us to have a period of time, you know, without things, you know, we would not expect if we hit the re-entry metrics to hit the revert back metrics, if you will, you know, a short time thereafter. That, you know, that's why I set them up the way that I did. So, but yeah, so for instance, maybe we're back in person and positivity creeps up. Well, that alone is not going to trigger a re-entry into, or I'm sorry, reverting back to all virtual. It would have to be all three, or, closely approaching all three. Ultimately, it's going to be some sort of a judgment call. So I would keep the board abreast of where we are every day. If I felt like there was a trend and we were hitting toward a decision point, I would certainly be actively reaching out to the board to explain where we are and where I see us being, in the next short period of time, and that we may have a decision to make in the near future. But I don't see it being, oh, we creeped up 1/10% or 0.2% last week, so now we have to change our instructional mode. I want to avoid that as much as possible.
Tom, I just want to be sure I understood. You had mentioned a Wednesday due date essentially to determine the following Monday, or that would be the last day in which you would mobilize and put boots on the ground to make a Monday switch to hybrid. Is that understanding accurate?
Yes, I going through and looking at what some other places around the country, how some other places around the country have set this up, and then talking with our team, how is it that we make this decision and then be in a position to execute? And also, how do we lay out sort of the sequence so our families know that in advance? So one reason, so I maybe should have stated this more clearly. The expectation would be to make the decision, regardless of what the numbers say, to actually make the formal decision on Wednesday. Because if you make it on Monday, you're giving a wider range of time for those numbers to suggest perhaps something different. I think we'll know with a pretty high degree of confidence the Monday prior. So I would certainly be pointing that up to the board and to our team. And if that's confirmed, then by Wednesday we would say, okay, Monday we're back in, because that gives us a little bit of transition time for transportation, for food and nutrition, and for our instructional staff, but most importantly for our families to make whatever modifications they need in their daily schedules so that they can also fully participate into the transition, whatever that transition is.
If you don't mind, I'd like to make a point and then maybe take a shot at moving the conversation forward. What Tom said at the end there is kind of, I think, the justification for 3 metrics over 1. There's if you're just looking at positivity rate in the county, and I understand that it's also absenteeism, but if you're just looking at positivity rate in the county, then you have very quick flips potentially, because you have 1 metric that you're looking at moving very quickly. If you have 3 metrics, I think you actually we have the ability to stay in longer, and ultimately, what I really want is I want to get back in those buildings. That's what I want. I think that's consistent with what a lot of folks in our community are telling us. Now, we surveyed the community and it was basically a 50-50 split. And I don't know if that data is out there for the community, but that's basically what we got. And that tells me that we need to put ourselves on a path towards starting a hybrid. The way I want to focus this is, again, nobody's ever done this before, other than everybody that's trying to do it right now. And there's going to be imperfection in what we are doing. And the conversation about the metrics is valid because as much as I trust Tom to do the work to prepare them, and I think it's incumbent in my role as a board member to trust my staff to have the technical expertise to do this work, I accept a very significant amount of fallibility in my own work right now, because I've never been in this position before. And I think that goes for the 8 of us, the 7 board members and Tom. So, you know, if we start getting down the line and you know, we realize that these things are not achievable, we need to have another conversation, and I am open to that. You know, I feel like we have 2 clear objectives as a board that are out there for us tonight. One is to get our community on a path towards bringing kids back into buildings, and the other one is to listen to the staff that are worried about the health and safety when they're back in the building. And they don't fit easily together, but we're also not going to get it, not guaranteed to get it right the first time. But that's where we've been so fortunate to have the grace of our community throughout all of this. I have these conversations with folks at work, and they say, "Oh, you know, I'm thinking about you," or, "Oh, you know, it's got to be really rough." And you know, I say, yeah, it is pretty tough. But I always bring it back to the fact that, you know, every single email that we get, folks always say, you know, listen, I know this is hard, and I know this is impossible, and I know there's no right answer here. And we need to draw upon that goodwill and that grace right now. We are trying. We're trying to find the right path forward, and we're balancing 2 very, very, very opposing interests that are derived from the same place. We all want to return to normalcy, and we all want consistency to get there. You know, I said very reluctantly that I was offering this motion because it's a hard thing for me to do. Because in my mind, the safest thing to do is to stay virtual. The arguments for the folks that say that are, you can't beat that, right? We all stay hermetically sealed in our homes, and this thing will nearly go away. But we can't do that. I mean, that's just not feasible. And we're hearing from our community that they want their students back in schools, and my fellow board members are right to be worried about the academic progress of some of our most at need kids. Honestly, all of our kids, the academic progress and the mental health issues are so important, and they need that in-person interaction. So we've got to move forward on this tonight. You know, I don't claim perfection. None of us do on this thing, but I think this is a logical step forward. I'm not trying to cut off conversation. I'm just trying to move it forward to this really terrible place of weighing the harm that we potentially do to people on both sides of this issue, and that's where we need to spend some time, I think, as a board.
I just want to tack on a little bit. We've heard a couple of times, what if we just can't get to the metrics? Let's just be clear what that means. If we can't get to these metrics, that means the virus is still rapidly spreading in our community. If we can't get below 7.5%, that's no fault of ours, but that would be a situation where we're not safe to have people tromping around our buildings.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, Kaylin, and I definitely understand, like, you know, there's a threshold, but if we're like 0.1% or whatever that is, like, here's where I've been wrestling, and I continue to go back, and I know I've had this conversation with colleagues, which is define for me safe, and nobody has been able to do that. They just said, well, we got to be safe. We just have to be safe. And definitely we have to be safe. I'm not arguing that, but nobody's been able to quantify that for me. And so I developed my own definition of safe that is a combination of, it's maybe a combination of whatever these metrics are, that I want them to be achievable metrics, which we all do. And it's a combination of what are the environments by which we create, how we set up policies, procedures. Are there things in the environment we can manipulate to make sure that we are creating safety? What are the policies and protocols around if there's a COVID positive case? What happens? How are we contact tracing? In fact, I even thought maybe we have to hire somebody to do contact tracing to make sure that we are right on top of it and we are connecting and just making those connections right away. And so nobody's been able to define that for me. And so I'm reluctant to say it's just numbers. because I think there are so many other variables that come into play with that. And by all means, like I wouldn't say, let's go back and we know in 9 weeks or whatever that is, we're at 9%, we're still going. Like that's pause for concern. But I also, like I said, don't want to get so close to that threshold that we continue to hold out. We've been on the downward spiral, but we're kind of stuck and we're not quite there yet. And that's
Well,
my concern.
to that, I would counter that once March and April were done and we started lifting restrictions across the country, look where it got us. We are exponentially worse now than we were in March. I would much rather be too slow than too fast in any of this. As I've said from the jump, if you're too fast, you get punished, and you get punished harshly.
So, Madam Chair, I
ahead.
guess I just have a couple of things I would offer. And, you know, I want more than anything to get to a decision tonight because I think that's what our public wants and that's what they deserve. So I'm not going to belabor this for much longer, but I want to bring us back to a couple of things. Because I really take seriously my responsibility, not only as an elected official, but also a member of this board. And, you know, I don't wake up every day saying that I am going to be in defiance of any law that is out there. I don't wake up and say that I'm going to go over the speed limit intentionally. I don't wake up and say that I'm not going to wear my seatbelt intentionally. You know, I wake up feeling like I want to be in compliance. And I want to do not only what is right, but I also want to do what I've been sworn to do as an elected official. And one of the things I struggle with every time we have this conversation is the challenge to achieve what is right and compliant by law and what is right and necessary for the students that we serve, and how we do both of those in a way that recognizes that we are in the most untenable position that anyone should ever be in, to have to even weigh the notion of health and safety and the potential for the loss of life. I don't think anybody's ever been charged with needing to make the kind of decision that we've been charged to make in this regard. That notwithstanding, though, I still don't want to wake up every day knowing that I am not compliant with the law, because that's just not who I am. That's not what I'm made of. So, you know, when I think about where we're going, and I think about the motion that's been advanced, it makes me realize that for some period of time that is yet to be defined, I'm going to be operating outside the law. And that's just not a good place to be. I also think about this notion of keeping students at the center of our decision making, and the fact that what we're taxed to do is to ensure the academic success of our students. And when I think about slide, you know, I think about the slow and steady slide that I think we have come to know and have really addressed over time and circumstances, summer slide. We know that that exists. We know that we have to deal with it every year. And that's just one of those things that's sort of built into our psyche relative to student achievement. But now we're faced not only with summer slide, we're faced with COVID slide dating back to March 12th through the end of what would have been the regular academic year, layered on top of summer slide. And now we're faced with virtual slide, which we know for probably the most challenging of our students in this district are the people that are impacted the greatest. I feel like we're failing a lot of our students. And when I think about what typically happens during the summer, we know that about 70% of the learning gain is lost in reading between the end of the school year and when students return. And I think the data says there's about a 50% loss in math progress. But I think the thing that bothers me the most about all of this is that when you layer all of those things on top of now the potential for us to be in a position where we are going to be faced with some real fiscal realities that may not allow us to have the resources at the end of the day to really address the academic needs of students well into the future, I get worried. You know, I'm not willing to be reckless and irresponsible to the point that I'm strapping a future board with having to deal with the consequence of a fiscal crisis that I've created, an academic crisis that I've created. And so for me, bottom line is I won't be supporting the motion, number one. But number two, what I am going to be pushing for is for us to monitor those metrics, whatever they are and whatever we decide they should be, I guess, tomorrow or whenever that topic comes up, but to monitor those metrics weekly and for us to be ready to meet weekly outside of our regular board meeting so that when we can pull the trigger, we can pull the trigger and we can move, because we cannot wait another day. We cannot sacrifice another student, and we cannot put ourselves in a position where our fiscal situation does not allow us to do what we need to do. We went into this year knowing that we potentially were facing a deficit already. And we layer on top of that a potential $60 million additionally. That's a problem. And I don't know how anybody could really realistically think that not making a decision about returning kids to school is one that not only is reasonable, but practical, and one that we shouldn't be focusing our attention on. I yield the floor.
I'd like to take a shot at this, please. I'm a pretty deliberate speaker. I weigh each and every word that I say. I try to be cautious in how I use my words, and in the conversations I've had with folks, and I had a conversation with high school principal today, and I where I found myself doing this, I think we can all agree that virtual learning is not our preferred mode, but I don't think that we can stipulate from our positions, not in the buildings, not doing the work, not prepping for the work, that we're failing kids. I went to the press conference yesterday, and I left convinced that I have to find a way to get kids back in buildings. I have to do that. That is my responsibility, no matter how reticent I am to put lives at risk, not just of teachers. You know, my mind goes to primarily first, honestly and foremost, to custodians and to bus drivers. People for whom, well, very rarely have substitutes. They're the ones really on the front lines, exposed to most amount of kids and the most interaction with what kids leave behind. And honestly, the most economically fragile, or more so than our teachers. So I do not agree with this belief that we're failing kids. I do agree that we're not serving them equitably. And it is our responsibility to find a way to get there. I am a trustee more than I'm a public official, more than I'm an elected official. I am a trustee, and I've always interpreted that to mean that I am responsible for the health of the organization, just the way that I would if I was on a corporate or a nonprofit board. And so I don't take lightly being out of compliance with the state. But even if we were to say, come hell or high water, we're bringing everybody back in person, that doesn't happen tomorrow. We are still out of compliance, probably at least a few weeks before we can turn that model around and bring kids back. So no matter what anybody says tonight, we leave this meeting out of compliance. But then the question comes, out of compliance to what? And Tom made a point earlier that I want to reiterate, because this is a conversation I'm having with folks right now. I respect the state. I respect what they're trying to do. I do not give any negative motives to what our governor's trying to do or what her staff are trying to do. I disagree with them. I disagree with them that I need to, as someone who's charged with the health of 32,000 kids and 5,000 staff, that I need to wait until 2,000 of those kids have COVID before I consider closing buildings. I understand that folks are worried about being out of sorts with the state. I understand that, and I've had those conversations with folks. I think the first order that we have tonight is to get right with our community, is to get them on a path to getting back in buildings and maintaining the virtual model for the people that need it, that want it. And I want to agree with Terry, because I've been having actually a similar thought to this, that I actually do think that we need to start meeting weekly, much as my wife will not appreciate me for making that suggestion. I do think it's right for us to sit in this virtual room weekly and consider this. And I say that because the pressure will only grow on us to bring people back, but that is our responsibility. I am reticent to do this. But I know that part of my obligation here is to do right by all of the people that are reaching out to us. And I think the more that we meet, the more that we have these conversations and talk about these metrics, the more that we will get to right on this thing. Because again, remember, we're not perfect, and nobody will be on this stuff. But you know, the more that we're willing to look into the abyss, the more we will learn.
Thank you for that, Rob. Dwana, I'm going to let you go ahead, but I do think we need to be close to probably calling a vote, especially because if this motion does not pass, we need to discuss what our next steps are, if there's a secondary motion on the floor or something related to that. So go ahead, Ms. Bradley.
Yeah, this has been a place that none of us probably thought we would ever be. So this is for me, I will speak personally, has been just challenging the fact that we hold the lives of almost 40,000 people in our hands. That's never been something that makes me feel good. And I feel like no matter what decision is made, someone's not going to like it. And so this is where I have to stand on this issue, is that, of course, I want kids back in school. I'm a former teacher for this district, and I know what is happening right now to our students, and I don't like it. But I also have this other side of me that wants to err on the side of safety as well. And I thank you, Kelly, for bringing up the conversation of what does safe mean and what does it look like and how do we get there? I do think we need to have a path to getting kids back to school. But man, if it's not the time to do it, we need to take our time. I think we have an opportunity right now to be creative in the way in which we do things. I don't know if all of that has been explored at this time, but I think we have an opportunity to look at education differently than we ever have looked at it before. And so I think that if we're going to be meeting weekly, we need to have those conversations as well. This can look different. I am all for our students meeting in person, but we have to do this slow. I have not apologized for I do not feel bad about us not being compliant right now, because I think we have a responsibility as our district to do what we think is best for our students and our staff in our way. And if this is the path forward with what Rob has proposed, I am all for that. But I think we have to follow those numbers. But I do believe that we are giving our community, if this passes tonight, that we are making a path forward to getting our kids back in school. But we've got to do it our way. And I don't apologize for taking that approach to do it in the way that we think is best for our students and our staff because we know them best. And so I don't like the position that we're in, but I think that Rob's motion at least gets us a path forward to getting to that. And if we have conversations about the metrics, that's fine, but I at least think that this is a start for us to get somewhere. But we've got to do this in a safe way, but also making sure our kids get educated. And I think we have an opportunity to start with the students that we put in our management limitations, and also think about looking at our young kids as well. I think we have some options of things that can be done. We just need to explore them. But I believe at least this gives us a start.
Juana, really quick, I want to echo what you said, because I've been thinking about at some points of what you said, but that innovation, creativity, and in a meeting last week, you know, we always hear the term new normal, but in this meeting, we talked about a better normal. And so we can get there, and I think we have this opportunity to do so, to be creative and innovative in education. I would like to see what would a plan look like to transition. Like, I'm not saying like why we have to go all at once, everybody, whatever that looks like. You know, is it, we already have our, you know, in our management limitation, we've identified kids that we know we want to really push and get them into buildings first. So what's that expansion look like? And we haven't seen a plan. You know, is it getting the littles in, like the K through 2 kind of a transition first, and then, you know, continue to add those grades. So that's one thing too, Tom, that I would like to see what a plan looks like for something like that. And maybe nobody else wants it, so if nobody else does, then that's fine. But I feel like we have some opportunity. We're already non-compliant. We have some time with this, but I also want to just say that my concern is whether or not the community feels like we have a path forward. I mean, we've identified when metrics are there, you know, what we'll do, but, and obviously we have no control. Like, I think that's the biggest challenge to all of this, is that we have no control over this decision, and that it really is, I'm going to sound cheesy on this, but it's up to our community, right? Like, how do you slow the spread? And I can say everything I can about wearing a mask and being cautious and doing all those things, but it's one of those things where we're having to base a decision on this one thing that's just out of our control, and it is not easy at all. But I want to welcome those innovative, creative ideas, Tom, and what are community members saying in terms of their support, because I know that there are community, you know, in terms of nonprofits or churches or businesses that are willing to work with us. So how can we be creative in those opportunities, and just looking at what options are available to create what that better normal can be?
I agree with you, Kelly, and I would like to see a phased-in approach similar to what you suggested, our highest risk students attending first based on that emergency management policy that we've put into place, followed by our youngest students, and so on and so forth. But the existing motion would not allow for that if we agreed to that.
I believe the motion says to implement a plan to begin to offer compliant hybrid model in addition to virtual, dependent on public health metrics. So I think the plan that we implement, if the board has a preference, we can, you know, state that to Dr. Ahart. If that is a preference of the board, we also could make an amendment to this motion or change this motion if that's the will of the board or of the motion maker, but that's what I would offer on that.
I would be very willing to amend the motion and I'm just thinking out loud right now, and this may not be worth putting in the motion, but it just may be worth making agreement among the 8 of us right now. But I would be very willing to advance the idea that in a week we will be back again to check on the status of the metrics and ask the superintendent to bring a plan to bring in to start providing in-person education for the most at-risk students, defined as special education, ELL, and pre-K through 2. Those are my definitions. I'm willing to be open on those. And I would say before we meet the metrics even. And I, again, I just want to raise up here, we surveyed families, and 50% of our special education families wanted to maintain virtual. We surveyed English language learner families, and 54% of them wanted to remain virtual. That means, though, that we have sizable percentages of those who want to be back in the buildings. And while I am reticent to bring everybody back, I would be supportive of getting our most at-risk kids back in the building even before we make the metrics. If that gets closer to the will of this board. And I know that, like, I just talked for about 4 minutes on what a motion is. So and Kirsten stopped taking notes about 3 minutes ago. So we can figure out amongst ourselves what that amendment would look like. But if that's helpful for folks for meeting the will of our community, I can support that.
So I would offer that the board actually, I think, has already identified, we didn't call it at risk, but we did identify some populations, and those were for the 2.11, the number 1 is to operate without a plan for assessment related to student outcomes goals or without adequately addressing the needs of students identified with IEPs, 504s, or ELL goals, or those students who are 2 or more years deficit in math and or reading, which I think you could stretch that definition to include PK to 2, because like without that instruction, they're gonna, we don't even have 2 years of data. So I don't know if that even fits the definition of deficit, but it seems like it could. So I don't know if you want to amend it to say something like direct the district to implement a plan to begin to offer a hybrid compliant model in addition to virtual, dependent upon student populations outlined in policy 2.11, or dependent on public health metrics, or we leave the amendment as it is and add on like the board moves that we do the thing that I put in the chat, which I can read again if you need me to, and begin to have a plan in place so that students within the at-risk groups listed in 2.11 are back to the building, I don't know, within 2 weeks time, 3 weeks time. I don't know.
Kirsten, there's a note in the chat that Noelle says they're already working on that.
Okay.
We just wait until our next weekly meeting and adopt that too. I think we get to the same point.
Right. I think what I'm hearing from the board is that we are, the consensus, I know different board members have different places of where they are at this. We are all reticent to bring back all students to some degree. However, there does seem to be several board members who would be in favor of bringing back our at-risk populations like ELL, our special education, those students that are 2 or more years deficit, our ELL students, sooner than that, knowing that that's a smaller number of students that could be spread out across the district. Am I summarizing that? The consensus of the board from conversation?
Are you saying to have a second set of metrics, or are you saying that when the metrics are reached, then they come back first?
No, I think it's to bring them back first and everybody else comes back when we've met the metrics, I think is what Rob was proposing, but I didn't put it into like a motion language because I'm not sure how to write that.
That was the intent of my question around those special populations. And I would also consider a small adjustment to bring us back to our SMART goals and look at PK through 3, seeing that we have so many goals around our 3rd grade literacy. So I don't want to muddy the waters, but
So I like the direction that Kim is suggesting. I also feel like, though, that we might want to be much more holistic in the options that we consider. I just put a note into the chat. Can we prepare scenarios that are predicated on return to learn strategy utilizing the phased approach? And the scenarios could really be predicated on the varying student groups that we would analyze and determine in highest order priority what that phased return looks like. So I heard Kim talk a little bit about K3 because so many of our metrics are focused there. I think there's also a desire maybe to figure out other subgroups or subpopulations that also need sort of that extra push, extra support, et cetera. So maybe we're getting the cart a little ahead of the horse, and maybe we rely on Tom to advance some scenarios that we react to that allow us to sort of level set based on need, prioritization, and goals. Just a thought.
Okay, so I think you're muted, Tom.
I wasn't sure if I was if it was my turn. Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that we're moving toward clarity here from the team's perspective. We started building a plan that we understood to be fully compliant with the first thought being do no harm, right? Because of what has transpired, we've been caught in this confusion of how do we create a plan that's equitable and also in compliant, and which is why I was asking for clarification in the initial motion to make sure that we had clarity about that, because we would have a lot more flexibility in addressing highest need, prioritizing highest need, and then opening up more broadly from there if the initial goal wasn't also to bring the entire district into compliance. Not that that's not our goal, because I share with the board a high degree of discomfort operating in a non-compliant mode, but also hold dear the health and safety of all of those that we serve and that share with us in providing that service. So I just want to make sure that as we come forward with additional planning, that we're moving toward the collective will of the board, which we absolutely are up to that challenge. What our folks, our community, and our board need to understand is this is a big ship that we're steering, and we've sort of been trying to re-engineer a very large system in motion, and we've done that a few times since March. And so setting a course and then attempting to change course with all the many moving pieces, and setting a course forward that adds service and in-person opportunities where we most want them, while not detracting from what we already have in motion for all of our students, is a real difficult challenge, and we're absolutely up to it. It's just really important that when we start moving in this direction and really start opening up or changing what we're offering, that we don't continue to shift gears, because we will lose students and staff in that transition and make it more difficult for our families to navigate. So what made this challenge most difficult initially was, if folks remember, people are saying, well, go back to your hybrid plan. The hybrid plan was not compliant. It was fully compliant when it was submitted and approved. So the pieces, the rules kept changing. So as we steer our course forward, I just want to make sure that the motion passed by the board is clear on what the intended goal is, you know, for these next few steps moving forward, so that we don't return to a conversation that says, well, this achieves part of it, but it doesn't get us to fully compliant, because I don't think those two goals are necessarily aligned, if you will.
Okay, I'm thinking that this conversation around what exactly we want the plan to look like, as mentioned in the motion, might be muddying our vote around this motion. So what I'm going to encourage the board to do is let's vote on this motion, and then let's have a conversation to be able to direct Tom and his team and schedule change, either change or whatever we want to do at the special meeting tomorrow night, but change that to maybe, let's say, Monday or Tuesday next week, and actually have Tom bring forward the plan. And then the board can approve if that plan meets our policy or not next week. That would be my proposal moving forward, is let's vote on this motion, and then we can direct Tom's work around the plan in the motion, which I think relates to the plan and our policy, and have a meeting next week to vote on whether the plans he's bringing are in compliance with our policy next week. I saw some thinking faces, so let me know what you think. Terry, your mic's on. I wasn't sure if you wanted to jump in or.
Yes. The only other thought that I had was, I think it's important as we continue to plan and as we continue to work towards, move towards, be intentional about getting to compliance, that there also, almost on a parallel track, is a somewhat regular conversation that would include the superintendent and possibly board leadership or board membership with the Department of Education. I think it's critically important that as we continue to move forward and as we continue to make our plans, that we are as transparent as possible with them, whether they agree or not with where we're going. I think we owe it to them to stay in regular contact and to really ensure that all of our efforts are focused on becoming compliant.
I think that makes sense.
I agree too.
Okay. So I guess at this time, I think I'm going to call a vote unless any board member feels like there's something pertinent before we do so. All right, I'm going to read the motion back as I wrote at 6:58 in the chat. I don't think we actually ever agreed on any amendments, so we're going to come back to that same motion. Mr. Barron moved and Ms. Bradley seconded. The motion is, I move that the board direct the district to implement a plan to begin to offer a compliant hybrid model in addition to virtual, dependent on public health metrics. That's our motion before us. Ms. Jenkins, could you please call the roll call vote?
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
No.
Mr. Cody?
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle?
Yes.
Ms. Martirano?
No.
Ms. Sawyer?
No.
The motion passes 4-3. With a passing motion, I believe there was some interest in the board around setting some parameters around what the plan might look like. I had recommended that we center ourselves and have our staff focus in on The students that we reference in our policy, so our students with IEPs, 504s, or ELL goals, or those students who are 2 or more years deficit in math or reading. Ms. Martirano had also referenced that all of our goals are written for 3rd graders, so that perhaps maybe we focus on those students. And I don't know, I think this would take a little bit of a deeper dive from the board to kind of think through this, but I don't know if the 2 or more years deficit are going to be encompassed in that K3 of who we bring back. But like for our kindergartners, we don't have any assessment data on them yet. I'm guessing that we're doing fall benchmarking with our kindergartners or soon, and we will know which ones are on the path to be at risk. So I don't know if that would meet what you're thinking, Kim, or other board members.
There's a comment from Noelle. Actually, there's a comment from Noelle and a comment from Matt. And
oops, I was too far up in the chat reading my motion.
It's fine. I think we knew this, but had honestly forgotten it and not raised it up. But we're serving, Matt says, over 500 students with disabilities in person right now. So consider that. And then Noelle says, she would advocate for basing it on metrics and lack of success in the current virtual model, which brings me to this question. And there's 2 questions, I guess, I want to put to you, Tom, or to Matt or Noelle. How, Kirsten just talked about kindergarten benchmarking. How soon would we know who is not being served well in the current virtual model? How soon could we speak to that? Could you give us an accurate judgment on that? And then how, and this is a tough question, but how likely would it be that the students that are not being served well in the current virtual model overlap with the populations that we identified in the policy?
That's a good question. I think there would be significant overlap. To answer your second question first, we have some idea right now how effective we're engaging and how successful our students are being, but certainly by the end of this week, we'll have a clearer picture, and we'll have an even clearer picture, the week after. It's a bit fluid, and certainly there are some variables over the course of a school day, if you will. They're not nearly as much in our control in a virtual environment than in an in-person environment. So it's a little bit of a moving target, but I think we could give a meaningful response to that by the end of this week, and certainly much more clarity by the end of the following week. With, certainly with some caveats.
So I think there's 2 things I want to raise up. That one is that to me is a good timeline, because I do not want to wait too long. And I don't think the board wants to wait too long. I don't think the community wants to wait too long. I don't think you and your team want to wait too long. So the sooner that we can identify students that we think would be best served by being in the building, the better. And so, I think we're there with you on that. The second thing, having spent time with community members yesterday at Edmonds, I would offer that another source that we have to identify students that are not being served well are our community partners, and that this is an opportunity where community and schools can help to identify, cross-check lists of students that we believe are struggling with the people that serve the communities that they come from and might know them well. So I would offer that as a suggested second layer of how we identify the students that we got to prioritize.
Yep.
Does that get to the clarity that the board wants to give, or that Tom, you and I would ask Noelle and Matt the same question? Does that give you the clarity that you need to move forward, knowing that we'll want to see kind of where we currently are, what you would say the next stage is based on kind of what the board has expressed, and then kind of like outline it from there in stages. And we don't need to put dates on it. I think we could probably put, you know, this is stage 0 where we currently are, where our current reality is, and what's the next step. And I think that goes hand in hand, Tom, with the metrics.
Of course.
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize that we have outlined a monitoring system, starting with foundational things that we know need to be in place as the foundation for success for our students. So there is already a system in place for monitoring. The next layer that we need to add is more of the academic monitoring. We certainly have a system in place for participation, access, kids who are submitting work and not submitting work, engagement. We also have teams that we're training and ready to utilize that data and mobilize in response to that. So I just want to be clear that that's currently part of the full virtual plan. That would not be considered phase 1 of a hybrid. So our next step would be to get down to those solid metrics beyond what's already happening with IEP meetings and determining on a student by student basis who's going to be better served and prioritized in person. But then what's that next layer? And it's really based on capacity and safe distancing efforts and staffing. And so then the transition to a hybrid certainly would be then the next phase of once that's in place, what comes next. But I want the board to understand, and we're happy to articulate that more fully to you in future board meetings if there's a desire. That we do have that monitoring system. We have dashboards set up. We have ways for students and parents to self-identify the supports that are needed. And we have school teams mobilized and ready to respond to that information. So I don't want there to be an assumption by our community or by the board that we don't currently have a way to monitor, even though it's certainly not comprehensive as we need it to be.
Thank you, Noelle.
Noelle, kind of real quick, is that system, sorry, Kim, were you going to ask a question? I'm sorry. Okay. Is that system set up for any family to call with concerns? They don't have to be the child with an IEP or 504 plan. It could be absolutely anybody who feels their child is not succeeding.
Yes, well, and it's a whole child approach. So they also have the opportunity to self-identify if there's food insecurity, for example. So it's not just an academic database. We're looking at what are the needs that might prevent any student from being successful, knowing that we don't have direct contact with students daily. What's the next best thing? And do we have a system for responding to those reports? And luckily, we do have school staff like community schools workers, success workers, counselors, ready to mobilize and respond and go to families and connect them with resources, certainly. So the academic piece is kind of our next layer to that. We don't have it as fleshed out as we need it to be, but know that system is underway and currently in place for those foundational pieces.
Hey, Noelle, this is Terry. Would there ever be any reason why either a family would be denied or there would be something that would preclude them from being served based on what you've just described?
Well, it depends how we define served. What it's not is an opportunity for a parent to say, we want to be served in person, and then we respond accordingly. That's opening a floodgate that we obviously aren't prepared to support, particularly from a safety standpoint, as you all have outlined tonight. We do have those resources, and Allison Vukovic and Jake Troja could probably speak more specifically to how we connect families with those resources. But like I said, we're still working on the academic piece of how do we respond when students aren't successful. What are those supports? One of them being maybe possibly bringing them in for in-person instruction, but it may also be connecting them with additional virtual support via our interventionists, counselors, support staff. And so we're looking at a multitude of resources, not just in-person learning as our go-to, knowing that we can't possibly accommodate every single family or student who requests in-person learning. If we could, we'd be in a hybrid.
I think you're muted, Terry.
I think we have to be really careful about the expectations we are setting or the expectations that could be created when we begin to talk about options that are available. So I just caution us to be careful about consistently applying the rules equally across all populations and all individuals. I think we could be on a slippery slope there, and I just want to make sure that we're avoiding anything that needs to be avoided, if you know what I mean.
And I'm going to ask, there's a lot of conversation happening in the chat right now, and that conversation, this is a public meeting, we have to be having that so all of our public can hear that, please and thank you.
So I can summarize what I was asking. I think I was asking related to something in the conversation, and I did not want to forget my question, but what I was asking was related to what's the process for which parents could request in person for an IEP with students if they're already seeing trouble. So like how fast could we respond to that? And what I'm being reminded of is that parents can call for an IEP team meeting at any time. And so what I wanted to know about was, like, I hope that our parents have the skills that they need to advocate within our system. And so Shelley has said that it's been shared both with parents verbally and in writing. And Jake said that he could provide an overview of that support system via email or by work session if needed. And I'm not going to ask or call for that work session now, but I will say that that might be helpful for this conversation we're having. So what I'm wondering is if maybe we provide that information by email, Jake, and you could be on hand to answer further board questions when we meet next Monday if needed, which I think you're always on hand when we have meetings, but does that summarize that, Kim? I'm sorry that kind of went on longer than I was anticipating.
No, it's okay. I just know that there are many people listening online, and we need to make sure that we're cognizant of all of those folks that cannot see the chat.
Yes, and I think these were habits that the board developed from when we were just on Teams, and now that we're streaming to YouTube, everybody can't see the chat. And I'm not entirely sure if the chat gets recorded. I thought the chat got recorded for our record, but we do need to double check that. So.
Madam Chair, is there other business that we have to take care of this evening?
That's just what I was going to check on. If we have no more clarity to provide for the superintendent, I am ready to wrap up this return to learn. I know that I had a note that there might be additional motions that might want to be made, but I think what Kim had been asking about prior will be taken care of in the meeting next Monday. Board members, does 6 p.m. work? Do we want to start at 5? What time? Rob, I see you have your hand up. Did you mean to have your hand up? Oh, yes. Okay. When would we like to schedule a special meeting for Monday? 6 o'clock or 5? It does 5 o'clock work so we can begin a little earlier? Okay, let's do 5 o'clock on Monday. Rob, if you have something else to add before we move on to the next item of business.
Yeah, could we structure that meeting to have it be an action item? Because what I would like to be able to do, because I do want to move with some purpose on this and some efficiency, is if what I would like to request is I'd like to request that we come out of that meeting and that Tom comes into that meeting with a plan to start serving students not served appropriately or not being served, whose needs aren't being met virtually in person, and I, it's not necessarily an action item of the board. The board officers and Tom can work that out, but I want to make sure that we're ready to press play on that, because I want to get the ball rolling on this stuff.
My recommendation at agenda planning tomorrow was going to be that what the board is approving are Tom's plans related to the emergency policy, oh no, Kelly lost internet. Yeah. Rather than voting on the plans themselves, if that makes sense, that we're voting on Tom's plans in compliance with our policy. And then I'm hoping also, Tom, that we can get a monitoring calendar, like add that policy to our monitoring calendar and start thinking about how frequently we monitor that. And it sounds like the board might want to do that weekly. So we would want to vote on that monitoring calendar next week too, which might include further weekly meetings just related to that item. So does that capture your thinking, board members? If so, there's no other business in our other E section, so I'm going to move us on to items of privilege, which is the chair's report, and just say that I don't have anything to report other than I am incredibly blessed to serve on this board. I know Terry said it, I know that Rob has said it, but the thoughtfulness with which all of us have approached these decisions is not lost upon me. And I also just wanted to clarify for the public, I'm not going anywhere in November. I'm serving out my full term. I will roll off this board pending no re-election in November of 2021, but my term as board chair will conclude in November pending no re-election, but at this time I'm not planning on running for chair election again. So I will be sending more information about our next steps on that to my board colleagues by email. I have nothing else to report. Do any other board members have items of privilege this evening?
Kirsten, this is Terry. This is not necessarily an item of privilege, but I was thinking that really to help us stay centered on the work that has yet to be accomplished around those things that we discussed tonight, including approval of the metrics, including weekly meetings, and all of the other things that sort of need to round out the work that's ahead. Would it be possible for you and Dewana in agenda planning with Tom to really come forward at our next meeting with a really clear path forward, set of decisions that need to be made, frequency of meetings, just a plan of action that we can all agree to so we can stay focused, keep things moving, and to really feel like we're utilizing the next 9 weeks to set ourselves up for what I hope is a return to learn in the hybrid model or whatever we determine it to be, but with kids back in school. I think that will just help us to not only be mindful about how we spend our time together, but I think it will allow us to be really thoughtful about the decisions that are ahead and how we stay focused on getting those done and taking care of the business of the district.
Yes, I will make sure that if we don't have that ready to go for agenda planning tomorrow, that maybe Tom and Dewana and I have a separate meeting this week to determine that. So we're ready to give that to the board. When you say next meeting, do you want it Monday or our next regular meeting? I just want to make sure I'm meeting the expectations.
Yeah, I think whatever is doable and feasible, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what moving forward looks like, and we have a clear path towards doing that.
Okay. I think we can get it done for Monday. So of what the board work looks like moving forward over the next however long we think we need it to be. So we'll work on that in agenda planning. If no other board members have any other items of privilege, I'll turn it over to the superintendent for his report. Sorry.
I do.
Sorry, Ms.
Can
Sawyer.
you hear me? You know what? I'm like trying to get out of the light for I had to join by phone. My internet went out at my house, so I apologize.
No, you're fine. Go ahead, Ms. Sawyer.
Yeah, and so because my internet is out, I was going to look up some dates, but the Community Legislative Action Team is going to be hosting 2 public events that they want to engage the community on, educating about CLAT, learn more from the community. And so I know that they have been shared on the Des Moines Public Schools, the CLAT page, Community Legislative Action Team page.
September 22nd at 7, as well as September 26th at 7.
Thank you for that. So I wanted to lift that up to board colleagues and the public that Community Legislative Action Team is starting their work.
And your mention of Community Legislative Action Team reminds me that we have some shuffling that we need to do around on committees. I think Dewana and I have talked through that with Dr. Ahart, and I think it talked to the appropriate board members, but I'm going to be putting that on the consent agenda at our next regular meeting for the committee. So watch for that. So if there's anything we can reassign when we have new board leadership, but there are some shuffling that we need to have approved by the board prior to that, I believe. Dr. Ahart, go ahead.
So first, a clarifying question. Are we meeting tomorrow to discuss metrics?
I don't believe so. We're going to meet next Monday where we'll discuss metrics along with the plan for moving forward. So
That's what I
you
thought.
and I and Dwana will have regularly scheduled agenda planning, probably with Shashank and maybe Matt. So
I wanted to just clarify just to make sure that was clear. Thank you. I just want to recognize the grace that our community has demonstrated. We are in a position that I think none of us ever expected, and certainly none of us hoped to be in. We've had shifting sands under our feet, and I believe this board has taken very thoughtful action moving forward, and it has been difficult to provide the kind of clarity that we need for our community and for my team to take the appropriate steps moving forward. I want to thank the board for continuing to have the right discussions, even in I'm not sure how we could make times much more challenging, but certainly this board is up to the task, as are my team and I. We want to protect everyone. Certainly, I know that's everyone's goal. What happens in the community outside of what is in the power of this board to control is really the responsibility of our entire community. And so I just want to continue to urge everyone to be thoughtful. There's certainly COVID fatigue that all of us is suffering from. All of us are suffering from. But as Mr. Cody explained earlier in the meeting, we're in a much different place now than we were back in March when this was high on everyone's radar. Unfortunately, we've not taken all of the steps that we need to take collectively as a state and a country to put us where we would all hope to be. And so I'm just asking everyone to do their part in ensuring that they're doing what they can as an individual and as a family unit to continue to help limit the transmission of the virus in the interests of everyone's health and safety, and in helping DMPS get back to what we're all striving to get back to, which is having all of our students every day in front of the best teaching staff in the state. I also just want to quickly recognize the outstanding leadership that my team has demonstrated in thinking creatively and only providing options for our community that have integrity and that exceed what anyone else is doing in terms of virtual instruction. I will be the first to tell you that virtual instruction is not the best mode of instruction for most all students. But I can also say, in protecting the health and safety of our students, that was our first priority, and a very close second was ensuring that what we provided was quality, and our team has done that to a level beyond what any of our colleagues, no disrespect intended, that beyond what any of our colleagues have done. So I want to assure folks that that's our continued drive, that what we provide, although it's not going to please everyone at the time that they want it, will be of high quality. And we're determined ultimately to have everybody back into our care in real time, in real space. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could make one clarifying, just a quick correction with the times on the CLAT event. It's
yes, please
Saturday
do.
The 20. Okay, thank you. Yeah, they are Tuesday the 22nd at 7 p.m. and Saturday the 26th at 9 a.m. So just so people have that, but again, check out the Facebook page, DMPS Community Legislative Action Team, and you can find that information there.
Sorry about that.
I believe we also maybe have a page from the board maybe that has additional information about CLAP, but I can't remember if we have something on the website or not. So check out Facebook first, but you could probably email Kelly and if you have further questions. Without any further business before us, I'm going to adjourn our board meeting at 8:54 p.m. Thank you, board colleagues. I will be in touch by email in the next few days regarding next steps, but I will see you virtually next Monday night. Thanks all. Have a great night. Bye.